Joseph Weizenbaum, a famous MIT professor and one of the fathers of artificial intelligence, said, "I am completely certain there is not a single doubt in my mind that by the year 2000, you will all be dead." Do you know when Weizenbaum said this? It was over 40 years ago.
Now, some of you might think that this is funny even, but it's actually a great representation of our class. When we took the State of the Planet survey, over half of us believed that there would be a major existential threat between now and 2050. How is this any different from Weizenbaum's thoughts?
It turns out that the fear of an approaching apocalypse is not uncommon. 1/4 of Australian children believe that the world will honestly end before they grow up. However, many, if not the majority, of these so-called threats are highly unlikely, driven only by the sheer horror of such a scenario unfolding. So you may be asking, what is wrong with unwarranted fear? All we are doing is taking extra precaution, right? The thing is, apocalyptic thinking comes at a cost in 3 ways.
Firstly, it takes up valuable brain power and resources that could be spent on other issues. We only have so many issues that we as a species can worry about, and spending lots of time worrying about zombie apocalypses or the rise of hyper-intelligent mice only takes valuable time away from more pressing issues such as climate change.
Second, it incites fear, forcing us to take drastic action and possibly do more harm than good. Just look at the 2003 invasion of Iraq, where the United States suspected Iraq of developing weapons of mass destruction. Over 200,000 deaths later, no evidence of such weapons was found. Many believe, in fact, that if it weren't for the death and lack of authority in Iraq, ISIS, the infamous terrorist organization, would most likely not exist today.
And finally, it causes us to conclude that we are doomed. Greg Easterbrook coined this as collapse anxiety, or the thought that the civilization is going to implode and there's nothing we can do about it. Why forego conveniences such as fossil fuels, the thought goes, when our world is going to the gutter regardless? This is a widespread problem. 15% of the world and between 1/4 to 1/3 of Americans believe this to be true. There's a great New York Times quote that summarizes this perfectly. These grim facts should lead any reasonable person to conclude that humanity is screwed. So, still though, if the threats are real, we can't simply ignore them. Having problems just because we're scared of threats doesn't matter if their threats are real and apocalyptic in nature. The problem is that we have no meaningful way to consider whether a threat is likely or unlikely. Any estimation, any statistic, any percentage that a threat would happen is probably just the opinion, likely that of an uninformed journalist. So the next best way then is to look closer at some of these threats to see how much damage and how much risk they actually have.
Let's start by looking at terrorism, one of the scariest threats of our time. Nowadays, it seems like terrorist attacks are just as frequent as celebrity relationships, and are getting worse, especially with the development of biological weapons and government's increased reliance on technology. It seems like all it takes is one virus, one hacker to wreak havoc on our world. In reality, it is much harder than it seems for something like this to happen. The terrorists would have to first get through the first line of defenses, being the world's security forces. These defenses are definitely not perfect, but they do a good enough job so that they prevent almost all cases of cyber and bioterrorism.
The other problem is that there just aren't that many terrorists out there. Think about it. Anybody with a car could simply drive into a crowd, creating tons of chaos and havoc. These attacks don't happen on a regular basis, though, because the number of terrorists is not as high as we believe. The reason they seem so dangerous is because terrorism, well, creates fear and terror, hence the name, and the media portrays that and blows it up to a scale that's much larger than the danger it actually is.
Of these terrorists, not many have the intelligence or discipline to pull off even a small attack, let alone outsmart the world's police, security, and counterterrorism forces. The only way of an attack of a large scale could occur is if the terrorists formed a group, creating a joint effort. The problem with this, however, is that the larger the group gets, the higher the chances of betrayal and detection. Terrorists must essentially walk a tightrope. Besides terrorism, we can also look at the threat of nuclear war. You've seen the news. More and more, North Korea is reporting successful missile tests. And we will not deny it. Nuclear weapons have the power to kill billions and destroy much of the planet with it. What we are saying, however, is that the actual detonation of any nuclear weapon is highly unlikely, for one big reason. Nuclear weapons are terrible peacekeepers and will therefore never be used. Many think that the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were what made Japan surrender. However, most historians believe that it was actually Russia's presence in the Pacific Islands that made Japan wave the white flag. And nowadays, nuclear weapons prompt an immediate response, and at this point are just a dangerous bluffing tool. Detonating a nuclear weapon today would be the worst possible war crime in history, and no country would be willing to take that jump.
Now, you might not believe us, but we have over 70 years of history to prove that this is true. No bomb has been dropped since World War II. And sure, we got close during the Cold War, but afterwards, both sides expressed that they were looking for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. More countries around the world now are starting to realize that nuclear weapons are not as effective as we might portray them to be. For example, in the 1960s, it was estimated that there would soon be 30 nuclear states. Guess how many there are today? Just 9. We also have seen a decrease in nuclear weapons over the past few years. The United States has decreased by 87% since its 1967 peak, and Russia has decreased its arsenal by 89% since its Soviet era peak.
Are nuclear weapons dangerous? Absolutely. Are nuclear weapons a legitimate threat? Absolutely not. Fear of a near apocalypse is becoming more and more frequent, and is bringing a slew of issues along with it. Fear hurts our society. Fear makes us damage ourselves because we think the world is ending. Fear makes us take a blind jab at the unknown and hope it hits this phantom apocalypse right in the face, killing many and hurting many along with it. Yes, some of these issues are real, but mostly are frankly hogwash. At the end of the day, don't grit your teeth, or else fear of an apocalypse will destroy us far before any apocalypse does.